In a small town, a mysterious cat had an unusual behavior. Night after night, it invaded a kennel to save dogs. With unparalleled skill, no security was a match for the cat. Until one day, a dog betrayed the hero cat, leaving it trapped behind. What happened next will leave you speechless, but first don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The small town of Serene Valley was known for its tranquility and natural beauty. Surrounded by verdant mountains and cut through by a crystal-clear river, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name and doors were rarely locked at night. However, not everything was as idyllic as it seemed at first glance. On the outskirts of town, hidden by dense vegetation, was Horizon Kennels, a place that had long been the subject of rumors and whispers among the residents. Stories about the precarious conditions and questionable practices of the establishment had been circulating for years, but no one seemed capable or willing to do anything about it. It was on a full moon night that everything began to change. The sky was clear, dotted with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. At Horizon Kennels, the restless dogs barked occasionally, their sounds muffled by distance and the thick walls of the main shed. That night, a slender and silent figure moved through the shadows of the grounds. With light and calculated steps, a cat with fur as black as night approached the kennel. Its eyes, of an intense and bright green, seemed to absorb all the light around, giving it an almost supernatural appearance. The feline stopped in front of the back door, its attentive ears catching every sound. With surprising agility, it leaped onto the sill of a half-open window and slipped inside the shed. The interior was gloomy and heavy with strong odors, a mixture of cheap disinfectant, low-quality food, and the unmistakable smell of animal fear. Cages lined up along the walls, most of them too small for their occupants. Dogs of various breeds and sizes huddled in cramped spaces, some sleeping restlessly, others observing the newcomer with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The cat moved silently between the cages, its green eyes examining each lock, each padlock. It stopped in front of a cage where a small mutt trembled, visibly frightened and sick. Gently, the feline rose on its hind legs and, to the puppy's surprise, began to manipulate the lock mechanism with its front paws. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional metallic tinkling. Suddenly, there was a soft click, and the cage door opened. The mutt looked at the cat, confused and hesitant. With a gentle head movement, the feline seemed to encourage the dog to come out. Trembling, the small dog took its first steps out of the cage. The cat guided it to the window through which it had entered, helping it escape into the night. Once, outside, the mutt looked one last time at its savior before disappearing into the darkness. The cat returned to its mission, moving from cage to cage. With an almost supernatural ability, it opened 3 more padlocks, freeing a total of 4 dogs that night. Each animal, upon finding itself free, followed the example of the first, escaping through the window and disappearing into the night. When the first rays of sun began to tinge the horizon, the mysterious cat had already left the kennel, leaving no trace of its presence. The staff of Horizon Kennels arrived for another day of work, completely unaware of the events of the previous night. It was only when Jake, the oldest handler, made his morning rounds that the alarm was raised. 4 empty cages, 4 open padlocks with no signs of forced entry. Panic set in among the staff, and soon the owner, Mr. Sanders, was called in urgently. "How is this possible?" shouted Mr. Sanders, a portly middle-aged man, his face red with anger. "4 dogs don't just disappear into thin air. Someone must have broken in here." But there were no signs of a break-in, no cut fence, no forced door. The security cameras, obsolete and poorly positioned, captured nothing but the shadows of the night. It was as if the dogs had simply evaporated from their cages. While chaos ensued at Horizon Kennels in town, a different story was beginning to unfold. Sarah, a young newly graduated veterinarian, arrived at her clinic that morning to find an unexpected surprise. Huddled on the doorstep, trembling and visibly frightened, was a small mutt. "Hello, little friend," Sarah whispered, approaching slowly. The puppy looked at her with big, frightened eyes but didn't run away. Carefully, she examined it, immediately, noticing signs of neglect and possible mistreatment. "Don't worry, you're safe now." Throughout the day, 3 more dogs were found wandering the streets of Serene Valley. Each of them showed similar signs of neglect, and all seemed disoriented and scared. The community, always united, didn't hesitate to help. Families offered to temporarily shelter the dogs, while Sarah and other local veterinarians provided the necessary care. As news of the rescued dogs spread, people began to make connections. Rumors about Horizon Kennels resurfaced, now with a new urgency. Some older residents remembered similar stories from years ago, dogs mysteriously disappearing from the kennel, only to be found days later, wandering around town. Meanwhile, in the shadows of alleys and dark corners of backyards, a black cat watched. Its green eyes shone with an almost human intelligence, as if assessing the result of its actions. With a graceful movement, it disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the distant echo of a meow that sounded almost like a promise. This was just the beginning. As the sun set in Serene Valley that day, a new energy hung in the air. The residents, previously asleep in their peaceful routine, now felt that something was about to change. In the homes where the rescued dogs had found temporary shelter, bonds began to form. Families who had never considered having a pet suddenly found themselves enchanted by the loyalty and gratitude of these resilient survivors. At the veterinary clinic, Sarah worked late into the night, caring for the newcomers and trying to unravel the mystery behind their sudden appearance. As she examined the last dog, a middle-aged Labrador with sad eyes, she noticed something curious: a black, fine, and long hair stuck to its coat. It didn't belong to any of the dogs she had examined. "What have you been up to, buddy?" she murmured, saving the hair for later analysis. "And who's your mysterious friend?" That night, as the town slept, the black cat once again crept through the streets. Its destination once more was Horizon Kennels. But this time something had changed. The lights of the main shed remained on, and raised voices could be heard from inside. The feline approached cautiously, its keen senses capturing every detail. Through a crack in the window, it could see Mr. Sanders gesticulating furiously, surrounded by nervous employees. New cameras were being installed, and more robust padlocks were being distributed. "I want armed guards here every night," Mr. Sanders bellowed. "No one else is going to steal my dogs. And if they catch the person responsible—" His voice lowered to a threatening tone that made the cat's fur stand on end. The days that followed in Serene Valley were marked by a mixture of excitement and apprehension. News of the rescued dogs spread quickly, arousing the curiosity and concern of residents. On the streets, in cafes, and at family gatherings, the subject dominated conversations. Sarah, now involuntarily the center of attention, found her clinic always full, not just with regular patients, but with people anxious for news about the mysterious dogs. She did her best to maintain discretion, but it was difficult to contain the buzz. "Dr. Thompson," Sarah called her mentor, an experienced veterinarian who had welcomed her to the clinic after her graduation. "I need to show you something." She led him to her microscope where she had placed the black hair found on the rescued Labrador. "Look at this. It's not from any of the dogs we examined." Dr. Thompson adjusted his glasses and observed carefully. "Interesting. It seems to be from a feline, a cat perhaps." Sarah nodded, her mind working quickly. But what would a cat be doing in the middle of all this? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Horizon Kennels had transformed into a fortress. Higher fences were erected, state-of-the-art cameras installed in every corner, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter day and night. Mr. Sanders, determined to prevent more incidents, personally supervised each change. "No one is going to steal any more dogs from here," he declared to his staff, his face red with contained anger. "And if anyone tries, well, they'll bitterly regret it." The employees exchanged nervous glances. Many of them had worked there for years, accustomed to turning a blind eye to the questionable practices of the place. But now, with all this unwanted attention, some were beginning to question their choices. Jake, the oldest handler, felt the weight of guilt more than anyone else. He knew about the dark corners of the kennel, the illegal practices, the mistreated animals, but the fear of losing his job, his only source of income, had always kept him silent. That night, after everyone had left, Jake stayed behind under the pretense of doing a final check. Alone among the cages, he allowed himself to truly look at the animals under his care. The sad eyes, the thin bodies, the smell of disease and fear. It all hit him like never before. "Forgive me," he whispered, his voice choked. "I should have done something a long time ago." Outside, hidden in the shadows, the black cat watched. Its green eyes, attentive and intelligent, seemed to understand Jake's internal conflict. For a moment, the feline considered revealing its presence, but prudence prevailed. It wasn't time yet. The next morning, Serene Valley woke up to a surprise. Colorful posters had appeared all over town during the night. In them, photos of rescued dogs smiled at passers-by, accompanied by messages of hope and calls for help. "Help us find a home for these survivors," said one of the posters. "Adopt a friend, save a life," proclaimed another. The initiative, organized by Sarah and a group of volunteers, aimed not only to find permanent homes for the rescued dogs, but also to draw attention to the larger problem haunting the town. The community's response was immediate and warm. Lines formed in front of the veterinary clinic, with people eager to meet the dogs and offer a home. Among them was Mrs. Ellie, an elderly lady who had been living alone since her husband's passing. "I've always wanted a little dog," she told Sarah, her eyes shining with emotion as she met the small mutt that had been the first to be rescued. "But I never had the courage. Now I feel it's the right time." Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. "I'm sure you'll be great companions, Mrs. Ellie." As the days passed, more and more dogs found loving homes. The community of Serene Valley, once asleep in its routine, now seemed to awaken to a new reality. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other now exchanged tips on pet care. Children who used to spend hours glued to screens now ran through the parks, playing with their new furry friends. However, not everyone was happy with this change. Mr. Sanders observed the growing movement with increasing paranoia. Every time he saw a poster, every time he heard someone talk about adoption, he felt as if they were pointing an accusing finger at him. "This has to stop," he muttered to himself, crumpling one of the posters he had found near his house. "I'm going to end this charade once and for all." Meanwhile, in the shadows of the night, the black cat continued its silent vigil. It observed the new homes of the rescued dogs, making sure they were safe and happy. Sometimes, one of the dogs would spot it through the window and bark in recognition, but the feline always disappeared before anyone could notice it. One night, while making its usual rounds, the cat noticed strange movement near Horizon Kennels. Unknown cars were coming and going, and suspicious-looking men were carrying boxes into the main shed. Intrigued and worried, the feline approached, cautiously. Hidden behind some bushes, it managed to catch fragments of a conversation. "Are you sure no one will find out?" "Relax, with this scheme we'll double the profits in a matter of weeks. And if someone gets suspicious? Leave it to me. I have my methods for dealing with meddlers." The cat felt its fur stand on end. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the problems at Horizon Kennels were far from over. In fact, they seemed to be just beginning. With this new information, the feline knew it needed to act quickly. But how to alert the humans? How to make them understand the gravity of the situation without revealing its true nature? As it silently moved away from the kennel, the black cat paused, looking up at the starry sky. The moon, almost full, bathed the town in its silver light. Somewhere out there was someone who could help, someone who would understand the urgency of its mission. With a low meow that sounded almost like a prayer, the cat disappeared into the night. The battle for the future of the animals of Serene Valley was just beginning, and it knew it would need all the help possible to win. At the veterinary clinic, Sarah worked late, analyzing the results of some tests. Her mind, however, was far away. Something bothered her, a piece of the puzzle that seemed to be missing. "There's something bigger happening here," she murmured to herself, looking at the photo of one of the rescued dogs, "and I'm going to find out what it is." Dawn in Serene Valley brought with it an atmosphere charged with expectation. The streets, previously silent in the early hours of the morning, now pulsed with an unusual energy. Groups of residents gathered at corners, talking in low tones and casting furtive glances in the direction of Horizon Kennels. Sarah arrived early at the clinic, determined to unravel the mystery that haunted her. As she opened the door, she was surprised by a familiar figure, Mrs. Ellie, the lady who had adopted the first rescued dog. "Good morning, Doctor," said Mrs. Ellie, her voice trembling with concern. "I'm sorry to come so early, but it's Buddy. He's different." Sarah frowned, inviting the lady in. "Different how, Mrs. Ellie?" "He won't stop barking at the window," explained the elderly woman, "and last night I swore I saw a black cat in the backyard. When I went to check, Buddy was out there as if he was talking to the cat." Sarah's mind raced. The black hair she had found, the mysterious barking. There was a connection there. She could feel it. "I'll stop by your house this afternoon to examine Buddy, okay?" Sarah promised, trying to calm the lady. Meanwhile, at Horizon Kennels, Mr. Sanders called an urgent meeting with his employees. The atmosphere was tense, and nervousness was palpable in the air. "Listen up," he began, his grave voice echoing through the shed. "Things are changing around here. We have new business partners. From now on, any questions about our procedures or about the animals should be directed to me." "Understood." The employees nodded in silence, exchanging apprehensive looks. Jake, the oldest handler, felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew something was wrong, very wrong. After the meeting, Jake sneaked to an isolated corner of the kennel. With trembling hands, he took out his cell phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd use. "Hello, police," he whispered. "I need to make an anonymous report." Outside, hidden among the shadows, the black cat watched. Its green eyes shone with a mixture of approval and concern. Jake was doing the right thing, but it put him in danger. As the day progressed, a sense of unease spread through Serene Valley. In the central square, a group of residents gathered to discuss the latest events. "I heard they're bringing new animals to the kennel," commented a lady, "but no one has seen any trucks coming in or out." "My nephew works at the City Hall," added another resident. "He said there are no official records of new acquisitions by Horizon Kennels for months." The whispers and theories multiplied, fueling the community's growing distrust. Meanwhile, Sarah fulfilled her promise and visited Mrs. Ellie's house. Upon examining Buddy, she found nothing physically abnormal. However, the dog's behavior intrigued her. He seemed anxious, constantly looking at the window and emitting low barks. "Mrs. Ellie," Sarah asked, "you said you saw a black cat, right? Can you show me exactly where?" The lady led her to the backyard, pointing to a shaded corner near the fence. Sarah approached, carefully examining the area. It was then that she noticed something: small, feline footprints in the soft earth. "Interesting," she murmured, taking a photo with her cell phone. Back at the clinic, Sarah immersed herself in her research. She compared the footprints with different feline species, analyzed the black hair found earlier, and reviewed all cases of rescued animals. The more she investigated, the more convinced she became that there was an intelligence behind it all. "It's not possible," she said to herself, rubbing her tired eyes. "A cat couldn't, or could it?" Night fell over Serene Valley, bringing with it a deceptive calm. At Horizon Kennels, the guards made their usual rounds, alert to any suspicious movement, but not even they were prepared for what was about to happen. The black cat, determined as ever, approached the kennel. This time, however, it was not alone. In the shadows around it, other felines moved silently: stray cats, domestic cats, even some wild cats from the nearby forest, all united by a common purpose. With impressive coordination, the felines spread out around the perimeter of the kennel. Some distracted the guards with meows and sudden movements, while others looked for gaps in security. The black cat, leading the operation, found a small opening near a poorly closed window. Inside the shed, the dogs began to stir. Barks of excitement and expectation echoed through the walls, alerting the guards. But when they rushed to check, they found only closed cages and apparently calm dogs. What the guards didn't see were the small, skilled paws working on the locks, nor the feline whispers guiding the dogs to freedom. One by one, silently, the animals were freed and guided out of the kennel. Meanwhile, in town, Sarah was awakened by an urgent phone call. "Doctor, It was the agitated voice of one of the volunteers. "It's happening again. More dogs are showing up on the streets, many of them." Sarah jumped out of bed, her heart racing. "I'm on my way," she responded, knowing that this night could be the turning point in this whole story. As dawn approached, Serene Valley witnessed a surreal spectacle. Through the silent streets, groups of dogs walked guided by cats. Residents, awakened by the noise, looked out their windows, incredulous at the scene. At the veterinary clinic, now transformed into an improvised rescue center, Sarah and a team of volunteers worked frenetically to welcome and care for the newly arrived animals. Between examining the dogs and coordinating efforts, Sarah couldn't help but notice a curious detail. Each rescued dog had somehow the same black hair stuck to its coat. Outside, observing everything from afar, the black cat sat, its green eyes shining with a mixture of satisfaction and determination. The battle was far from over, but this night had been a significant victory. The dawn in Serene Valley brought with it an atmosphere of controlled chaos. The news of the new rescues spread quickly, and soon Sarah's veterinary clinic was surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers, volunteers, and local journalists. Sarah, exhausted after a whole night of work, now faced a new battle, dealing with the press and authorities who were beginning to arrive. The town's mayor, a middle-aged man named Frank Wilson, appeared accompanied by advisors and police officers. "Dr. Sarah," he called, his authoritative voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. "We need to talk in private." Reluctant to leave her patients but aware of the importance of the moment, Sarah followed the mayor to a back room of the clinic. "What's going on here?" Frank asked, his tone a mixture of concern and irritation. First it was a few dogs. Now, we have almost 30 animals appearing out of nowhere. Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Mr. Mayor, I believe we're facing something much bigger than we imagined. These dogs, they come from Horizon Kennels." The mayor's face paled slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Doctor. Do you have proof?" "I have evidence," Sarah replied, showing him photos of the dogs, medical reports, and finally, the mysterious black hair. "And there's more. I believe someone, or something, is helping these animals escape." Meanwhile, at Horizon Kennels, Mr. Sanders was beside himself. The discovery of the empty cages in the morning had triggered an unprecedented crisis. "How is this possible?" he shouted, pacing back and forth in his office. "We had guards, cameras, a whole security system." Jake, the oldest handler, observed everything with a mixture of relief and apprehension. His anonymous report to the police had not yet had a visible effect, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Suddenly, a commotion outside caught everyone's attention. Police cars were arriving, their sirens cutting through the tense morning air. "Mr. Sanders," called a police officer, entering the office without ceremony. "We have a warrant to inspect these facilities. Please cooperate." Mr. Sanders's face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. In town, news of the police inspection at Horizon Kennels spread like wildfire. Groups of residents gathered spontaneously, marching towards the location. Among them, Mrs. Ellie, accompanied by Buddy, led a group of indignant elderly people. "Enough secrets," they shouted. "We want the truth." Sarah, accompanied by the mayor and some volunteers, also headed to the kennel. On the way, she couldn't help but notice something curious. Cats of all colors and sizes seemed to be following the crowd, observing everything from rooftops, walls, and trees. When they arrived at Horizon Kennels, the scene was surreal. Police officers searched the place, employees were being interrogated, and an agitated crowd gathered at the gates. It was then that something extraordinary happened. A loud and penetrating meow cut through the air, momentarily silencing all the confusion. On top of the kennel wall, standing out against the blue sky, was a black cat with intense green eyes. Sarah felt her heart race. It was him, the mysterious cat she had been tracking for weeks. As if responding to a silent call, dozens of other cats began to appear, surrounding the perimeter of the kennel. The crowd watched, open-mouthed, as the felines positioned themselves strategically. "My God," whispered Mrs. Ellie, hugging Buddy tightly. "It's as if they're protecting us." Inside the kennel, the police inspection revealed horrors beyond imagination. Falsified records, illegal medications, and deplorable sanitary conditions were just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Sanders, seeing his empire crumble, tried one last desperate move. Running to a back room, he began to destroy documents and evidence. But he didn't count on a certain black feline that had somehow infiltrated the building. With a loud meow, the cat attracted the attention of a police officer, guiding him directly to Mr. Sanders and the evidence he was trying to destroy. "Stop immediately!" shouted the officer, drawing his weapon. "You're under arrest!" Outside, the crowd exploded in applause and cheers of joy when they saw Mr. Sanders being led away in handcuffs. Sarah, however, had her eyes fixed on the black Uy cat that now calmly walked in her direction. Crouching down, she extended her hand to the feline. "Thank you," she whispered, not caring if anyone thought it strange that she was talking to a cat. "You saved many lives." The cat looked her in the eyes, a gaze that seemed to contain centuries of wisdom. With a soft purr, it rubbed its head against Sarah's hand before disappearing again into the crowd of felines. As the afternoon progressed, Serene Valley found itself at the epicenter of a media storm. Journalists from all over the country arrived to cover the story of the horror kennel and the hero cats. Sarah, now recognized as the town's main animal advocate, was bombarded with interview requests. But her mind was elsewhere. She knew that despite this victory, the fight was far from over. That night, as the town celebrated the closure of Horizon Kennels and the rescue of the animals, Sarah found herself alone in her backyard, looking at the stars. "I know you're there," she said softly. "And I know we have a lot of work ahead." "Kevus?" As if in response, a soft meow sounded in the darkness. The black cat emerged from the shadows, sitting beside her. Together, human and feline, they contemplated the night sky, knowing that this was just the first battle in a much larger war for the protection and respect of animals. The days that followed the closure of Horizon Kennels were marked by a palpable tension in Serene Valley. The town, which had recently celebrated its victory against animal trafficking, now found itself plunged into a state of constant alert. Sarah, more than ever, felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She knew that Mr. Sanders would not rest until he had his revenge, and she feared not only for her own safety, but for that of all the animals and allies who had fought by her side. One morning, while examining one of the dogs rescued in the operation, Sarah received an unexpected visit. Clara Winters, a national TV presenter, entered the clinic, her usually confident face now marked with concern. "Sarah," Clara began, her voice low, "I received information from a reliable source. Mr. Sanders is not acting alone. He has support from powerful people who were exposed in our investigation and want revenge." The news, although alarming, didn't completely surprise Sarah. She had suspected that the corruption network was more extensive than they initially thought. "What can we do?" Sarah asked, suddenly feeling exhausted. Clara put her hand on her friend's shoulder. "Keep fighting, but this time we need to be smarter. I have a plan." Meanwhile, in the alleys and shadows of Serene Valley, a silent network was mobilizing. The black cat, tireless in its vigil, had recruited not only felines but also stray dogs, birds, and even some rodents. Each creature had a role to play, observing, listening, and reporting any suspicious activity. Mrs. Ellie, now a central figure in the animal protection community, organized groups of volunteers to patrol the town. "We won't let these criminals destroy everything we've achieved," she declared at community meetings, her voice trembling not with fear but with determination. Mayor Frank Wilson, pressured by public opinion and genuinely committed to the cause, doubled down on security in the town. Surveillance cameras were installed at strategic points, and the local police received specialized training in combating animal trafficking. However, despite all efforts, the threat seemed to be approaching each day. Small incidents began to occur. An animal shelter had its locks broken during the night, although no animals were taken. Defamatory pamphlets against Sarah and her allies appeared scattered throughout the town, and rumors of a new trafficking operation circulated in the criminal underworld. One night, while Sarah was working late at the clinic, she heard a suspicious noise coming from the back of the building. With her heart racing, she cautiously approached the back door. Before she could reach the handle, The door violently swung open. For a moment of pure terror, Sarah found herself face to face with Mr. Sanders. "Surprised to see me, Doctor?" He smiled, a maniacal gleam in his eyes. Sarah backed away, desperately looking for something she could use as a weapon. But, before Mr. Sanders could advance, a fierce roar cut through the air. Like a black lightning bolt, the mysterious cat leaped from the shadows, landing on the intruder's face. Mr. Sanders screamed in pain and surprise, staggering backward. Taking advantage of the distraction, Sarah ran to the phone, quickly dialing the police number. When sirens began to sound in the distance, Mr. Sanders, his face marked by scratches, cast one last hateful look at Sarah. "This isn't over," he growled before disappearing into the night. Trembling, Sarah bent down to check on her feline savior. The black cat looked at her with its intense green eyes, as if to say, "I'm here. I'll always be." The incident at the ID clinic was a turning point. It became clear to everyone that the danger was real and imminent. Clara Winters, using her media contacts, launched a national alert campaign, exposing the risks that Serene Valley and its cause were facing. The response was overwhelming. From all over the country, offers of help arrived. Lawyers volunteered. To strengthen animal protection laws, security experts offered their services, and ordinary citizens sent donations and messages of support. Sarah, although touched by the wave of solidarity, knew that the real battle was yet to come. In an emergency meeting with Clara, Jake, Mrs. Ellie, and Sheriff Robert, she expressed her fears. "Mr. Sanders won't give up," she said, her voice laden with concern, "and I'm afraid of what he might do in his desperation." Clara, always the strategist, proposed a bold plan. "What if we use this threat to our advantage? We could set a trap, lure Mr. Sanders and his allies into a situation where we can expose them once and for all." The idea was risky, but everyone agreed it could be their best chance. In the days that followed, an elaborate plan was drawn up. Every detail was meticulously planned, every possible scenario considered. As the town prepared for what could be its final battle against the forces threatening its animals and its peace, Sarah found a moment of quietude. Sitting in her backyard, observing the stars, she felt the familiar presence of the black cat by her side. "Are we ready?" she asked softly. The feline looked at her, its green eyes shining with fierce determination. At that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Humans and animals, united by a greater purpose. As the night progressed, a palpable energy hung over Serene Valley. The town, once peaceful, now prepared for a confrontation that could change not only its destiny, but that of animals throughout the country. The stage was set, the players positioned. The final battle was about to begin. The day dawned in Serene Valley with a deceptive quietness. The streets, normally bustling at this hour, were strangely deserted. The residents, aware of the ongoing plan, stayed in their homes, eyes alert. At windows, hearts racing in anticipation. Sarah, Clara, Jake, and Sheriff Robert gathered at the veterinary clinic at daybreak. The plan was bold. They had spread false information about a large shipment of exotic animals arriving in town, an irresistible target for Mr. Sanders and his network of traffickers. "Everyone in position?" asked Clara, checking her hidden filming equipment. Sarah nodded, absently petting the black cat that, as always, was by her side. "Yes, but I still can't believe we're actually doing this." Sheriff Robert checked his weapon one last time. "Remember, safety first. At the slightest sign of real danger, abort the mission." The hours that followed were filled with almost unbearable tension. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Disguised volunteers patrolled the streets, while police teams hid at strategic points. It was almost noon when the first sign of suspicious movement was detected. A convoy of 3 dark vans entered the town, heading for the fake delivery point they had prepared. "It's time," whispered Sarah, feeling her heart leap. The plan began to unfold. The vans stopped at the designated location, and armed men got out, looking cautiously around. Among them, Sarah immediately recognized the bulky figure of Mr. Sanders. Clara, hidden in a nearby building, began to broadcast live to a national television network. Hidden cameras captured every movement, every word exchanged between the criminals. But then something unexpected happened. One of the men, apparently more nervous than the others, drew his gun upon hearing a sudden noise. The sound of the shot echoed through the silent street, triggering chaos. Police officers emerged from their hiding places, shouting orders to surrender. The criminals, caught by surprise, reacted desperately. A shootout began, with civilians running for cover. In the midst of the confusion, Sarah saw Mr. Sanders trying to escape through an alley. Without thinking twice, she ran after him, the black cat at her heels. "Stop!" she shouted, chasing him through narrow streets. Mr. Sanders, cornered, turned to face her. His eyes glowed with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You ruined everything," he snarled, advancing threateningly. At that critical moment, something extraordinary happened. From all corners, cats began to appear, dozens, then hundreds of them surrounding Mr. Sanders. Stray dogs joined the crowd, growling menacingly. Even birds and small animals seemed to unite for the cause, creating a living barrier between Sarah and her pursuer. Mr. Sanders, stunned, looked around in panic. What is this?" Sarah, equally surprised, felt a wave of emotion envelop her. "It's the power of compassion," she said softly. "Something you never understood." As if on cue, the sound of police sirens grew louder. Sheriff Robert and his officers arrived at the scene, quickly apprehending Mr. Sanders and his accomplices. The town's residents, who had been watching from windows and doorways, began to emerge, cheering and applauding. In the days that followed, Serene Valley became the center of national attention. The story of the town that stood up against animal cruelty and organized crime captured hearts across the country. Sarah, Clara, and their allies were hailed as heroes, but they were quick to redirect the praise to the true stars of the story, the animals themselves. The black cat, ever present yet elusive, became a symbol of hope and resilience. Though it was rarely seen after the events, its legacy lived on in the changed hearts and minds of the townspeople. Horizon Kennels was permanently shut down and transformed into a state-of-the-art animal sanctuary, funded by donations that poured in from around the country. Sarah, with the help of Clara's media connections, established a nationwide network of animal welfare organizations, ensuring that the spirit of what happened in Serene Valley would spread far and wide. As for Mr. Sanders and his cohorts, they faced justice in a highly publicized trial. The evidence gathered by Sarah, Clara, and their team, combined with Jake's testimony, ensured that those responsible for the animal cruelty and trafficking would spend years behind bars. One evening, months after the dramatic events, Sarah sat on her porch, reflecting on how much had changed. The town was peaceful once more, but it was a different kind of peace, one built on awareness, compassion, and a deep respect for all living beings. A familiar meow caught her attention. The black cat, its green eyes as mysterious as ever, sat beside her. "We did it, didn't we?" Sarah said softly, reaching out to stroke its fur. "But our work is far from over." The cat purred in agreement, its gaze fixed on the horizon. As the sun set over Serene Valley, Sarah knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. The story of the town that was saved by a cat had inspired a movement, and its echoes would be felt for years to come. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around their televisions, captivated by Clara Winters' special report on the Serene Valley saga. The story of a small town's transformation, guided by the unlikely alliance of a determined veterinarian and a mysterious black cat, touched hearts and opened minds. And so, Clara concluded her report, her eyes shining with emotion. Serene Valley reminds us all of the extraordinary power of compassion and the difference that each of us, human or animal, can make in this world. This is Clara Winters, reporting from a town forever changed by the love for our furry, feathered, and four-legged friends. As the credits rolled, viewers sat in stunned silence, many wiping away tears. In homes, shelters, and sanctuaries across the nation, a ripple effect began. Phone lines at animal welfare organizations lit up with calls from people wanting to volunteer, adopt, or donate. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Sien Serene Valley Effect and Be the Black Cat as people shared their own stories of animal rescue and pledged to make a difference in their communities. Back in Serene Valley, life settled into a new normal. The townspeople, once passive bystanders to animal cruelty, now took active roles in ensuring the welfare of all creatures, great and small. The local school introduced a comprehensive animal welfare curriculum, teaching the next generation about empathy, responsibility, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. Sarah's veterinary clinic, now expanded and modernized thanks to generous donations, became a beacon of hope for animals in need from all over the region. She often worked late into the night, but the satisfaction of seeing once broken animals heal and find loving homes made every exhausting hour worthwhile. Mrs. Ellie, whose adoption of Buddy had been one of the first sparks of change, now ran a popular pet therapy program for the elderly and children with special needs. The sight of her walking down the street, Buddy trotting happily beside her and a parade of cats following, became a common and heartwarming sight in Serene Valley. Jake, the former kennel worker turned whistleblower, found redemption in his new role as the head caretaker at the animal sanctuary that replaced Horizon Kennels. His intimate knowledge of the animals' needs, combined with his determination to right past wrongs, made him an invaluable asset to the community. Mayor Frank Wilson, recognizing the positive attention and economic boost the Animal Welfare Initiative had brought to Serene Valley, threw his full support behind making the town a model of animal-friendly policies. He worked tirelessly with Sarah and other advocates to implement progressive animal protection laws that would serve as a template for other municipalities across the country. And what of the mysterious black cat, the silent hero whose actions had set everything in motion? While it was no longer seen as frequently around town, its presence was felt everywhere. Sightings of the cat became almost mythical, with residents swearing they saw it patrolling the streets at night or appearing just in time to prevent an animal from harm. Some speculated that the cat was more than just an ordinary feline, perhaps a spirit guide, or a manifestation of nature's will to protect its own. Others insisted it was simply an exceptionally intelligent and compassionate animal. Whatever the truth, the legend of the Black Cat of Serene Valley grew, inspiring countless stories, artworks, and even a popular children's book series. As the months turned into years, Serene Valley's transformation continued to inspire change far beyond its borders. Other towns and cities began to implement similar animal welfare programs, often reaching out to Sarah and her team for guidance. The Serene Valley model became a case study in universities, discussed in veterinary schools, and cited in animal rights legislation. One crisp autumn evening, 5 years after the events that had changed everything, Sarah stood at the edge of the sanctuary that had once been Horizon Kennels. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the peaceful grounds where rescued animals now roamed free. A soft meow drew her attention. The black cat sat beside her, its green eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Look at how far we've come," Sarah said softly, gesturing to the sanctuary and the town beyond. "All because you decided to unlock a cage one night." The cat purred, rubbing against her leg. Sarah crouched down, meeting its gaze. "I've always wondered," she whispered, "who are you really? What made you start all this?" For a moment, she could have sworn she saw a flicker of something human-like in those mysterious green eyes. But before she could ponder it further, the cat turned and bounded away, disappearing into the lengthening shadows. Sarah straightened up, a smile playing on her lips. Perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. What mattered was the change they had achieved together, human, animal, and whatever lay in between. As she walked back towards town, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The story of Serene Valley and its animal heroes had touched countless lives, but there was still work to be done. As long as there were animals in need and people willing to stand up for them, the legacy of the Black Cat would live on. The stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a chorus of happy barks and meows echoed through the air. In that moment, Sarah knew that while their journey had been extraordinary, it was far from over. The adventure, of creating a more compassionate world for all beings, was a never-ending story, one that would continue to unfold in Serene Valley and beyond, inspiring generations to come.